There is a steak sitting in a plastic tub in my refrigerator right now, $5 and change. Yellow Walmart clearance sticker still on the wrapper, the one they slap on when a cut's about to age out of the case. It's been sitting in a shallow black bath since 9 last night, and in about an hour I'm going to pull it out, dry it, and put it over fire. Last month I brought a version of this to my daughter's table. Her husband works 2 jobs from a kitchen he can actually see. He cut into it, chewed, went quiet for a second, and asked me which restaurant in town was running a Michelin chef, because he'd read there was one 2 towns over doing steaks at $140 a plate that tasted just like this. I let him believe that for about a minute. Then I told him the truth, and I'm going to tell you now too, before we go any further, because I don't like sitting on a fact that costs you money. It will not taste like what it's soaking in. It will not go gray and chalky at the edges the way lemon juice and vinegar do to a piece of meat. It will not need a jacquard punching 200 holes through good muscle. It will not need a packet of white powder off the spice aisle, 3 shelves down from where I'm about to send you. It will not need 14 ingredients in a bottle hiding behind soy sauce and corn syrup. And it will not cost you $1 more than the $5 you already spent standing at that case. It does one thing. It makes a working muscle behave like a lazy one. That's the whole trick, and it's 100 years old. My name is Hank Dunlap. I cut meat for 31 years, most of it behind one block, and I'll tell you plainly, I do my own shopping at Walmart now, same as anybody else, because the little shop I ran is long closed, and the pension doesn't stretch the way it used to. My hands don't open all the way in the morning anymore. That's what 3 decades with a knife does to you. But I still know a carcass better than most men know their own children, and I know exactly what that meat case in the back of your Walmart is doing to you because I helped design cases just like it 30 years ago, before I ever knew it would end up being the one I shop at myself. Now, before I show you the method, I have to say the part that's going to annoy you a little because it annoyed me the first time somebody explained it to me. The kitchen, putting out that $140 plate 2 towns over, is doing some version of what I'm about to show you back where you can't see it before that steak ever comes out through the swinging door. Fine dining did not invent tenderness. It just learned patience and never had to explain the bill. And the case at your Walmart is arranged the way it is on purpose. Not one package sits where it sits by accident. The lighting over the ribeye, the eye-level shelf, which cuts greet you first when you round the corner off the produce aisle. I know where they put the expensive third of the animal, and I know exactly why they put it there. By the end of this, you're going to walk past $30 of ribeye, come home with $5 of something else, and eat better than the man who paid the $30. And you're going to do it with something already sitting in your kitchen right now. Here's the part almost nobody understands, and if you don't have this part, none of the rest makes sense. Tenderness is not quality. Tenderness is location. Every cut in that case came off the same animal, same feed, same water, same number of days on the same lot, same cooler. There is no secret Michelin cow. Nobody is raising a fancier breed for the $24 cuts. The only difference between the expensive third and the rest of the steer is what the muscle did while the animal was still standing up. The ribeye sits high along the back in the middle. That muscle does almost nothing for the whole life of the animal. It rides along, holds the spine up, and that's the extent of its ambition. So the fibers stay fine and loose, and fat settles in between them in little threads. That's all marbling is. Fat that had nowhere else to be. A sirloin or a round comes off the hindquarter. That muscle pushed 600 pounds of animal around a pasture every day of its life. It worked. So the fibers are thicker, bundled tighter, and the connective tissue holding them together is stronger. That's what tough means. It doesn't mean bad. It means it had a job. So when you pay 6 times as much for that ribeye, understand what you're actually buying. You're paying a premium for the one part of the animal that never did anything. And here's the number that ought to bother you. The ribeye and the strip loin together come to somewhere around 8% of what's hanging on that carcass. 8. The whole country fights over 8% of the animal and drives the price into the sky, while the other 92% gets sold at a discount or ground into something for a Tuesday casserole. That's not a quality problem, that's a demand problem. And a demand problem is one you can walk right around when somebody shows you how. Nobody standing behind that Walmart counter is going to tell you how, and not because they're dishonest. It's just not their job. So here's what I buy. Chuck eye steak, if you can find it. The ribeye runs from about the 6th rib back to the 12th. The chuck eye is the same muscle continuing forward into the shoulder. It doesn't know it crossed a line. There's a spot on that animal where you can put a knife down, and the meat on one side of the cut is worth $20 a pound, and the meat 2 inches over is worth $6. Folks call it the poor man's ribeye. I call it the ribeye that got sorted into the wrong bin. Flat iron, out of the shoulder. Nobody sold this cut for most of the last century because a thick seam of gristle runs straight through the middle of the muscle. Then some university meat scientists figured out that if you cut along that seam instead of across it, you get 2 flat pieces that test out as the second most tender muscle on the whole steer. Second, and it comes out of the shoulder. Denver, also out of the chuck. Better marbling than a strip most weeks. Half the price. Top sirloin, which is what I've got soaking tonight. I picked it because it's the hardest test there is. If this works on a sirloin, it works on anything you can find marked down at that Walmart counter. Now, where this comes from, because I didn't invent it and I won't stand here and let you think I did. The man who trained me was named Walt. He came home from Korea and went straight behind a meat counter, and he stayed there the rest of his working life. Walt never read a word about it. He had a cold pot sitting on the back counter, and whatever lean cut he was taking home for his wife went into it overnight. He called it putting it to bed. That was the entire vocabulary. Every man in that shop did it, and not one of us could have told you why it worked. We just knew that it did. That's a different kind of knowing, and in my experience, it's the more reliable one. I've spent a good part of the years since figuring out the why, and now I can hand it to you. What's in the pot is coffee. Black, brewed strong, chilled cold. And before you tell me you've heard of coffee rubs, this isn't that. A rub sits on the surface and burns. This is a soak. Here's why coffee, and not something out of a bottle. Every marinade you've ever been handed works on acid or it works on enzymes. Vinegar sits around a pH of 2.5. Lemon juice, about 2. Those are aggressive. They will break protein down fast, and they'll do it so hard that 30 minutes in, the outside of your steak has already gone chalky and gray before you've put any heat on it at all. Pineapple and papaya are worse because those carry actual enzymes that don't know when to stop. Leave a steak in pineapple juice overnight, and you'll pull out something with the texture of wet bread. Coffee sits around a pH of 5. Weak acid. Gentle enough that a steak can sit in it 12 hours and the surface never takes damage. That's the entire advantage. Not that it's stronger, that it's weaker, and it lets time do the job instead of force. Walt didn't know any of that chemistry. He just knew the pot never wrecked anything, which is the same fact, arrived at from the other end. And you get 2 things out of coffee that vinegar will never give you. Dark roast is loaded with sugars left over from roasting, and when that hits a hot grate, you get a crust that forms faster and darker than it would on bare meat. That's Maillard browning, and that's where most of what you call steak flavor actually lives. Second, if you salt the coffee, and you should, the salt goes to work at the same time, and salt reaches further into a piece of meat than any acid ever will. Let me be straight about a claim floating around every cooking video on this website, because it isn't true. A marinade does not go all the way through a steak. It never has. Soak it 4 hours or 40, and you're looking at maybe 1/8 of an inch of real penetration. I've cut them open and checked more times than I can count. So why bother if it only reaches 1/8 of an inch? Because that 1/8 of an inch is exactly where your teeth land first. The first bite decides what you think of the whole steak. If that outer layer is soft, seasoned, and browned properly, your brain files the entire piece as tender before it ever reaches the middle. The salt, meanwhile, is doing the deeper work of holding moisture in while it cooks. Here's the recipe, and it's short. Brew your coffee twice as strong as you drink it. Dark roast, coarse ground, nothing flavored, nothing off the seasonal shelf with a pumpkin on the bag. Fresh, not yesterday's pot going bitter on a burner. Chill it all the way cold, not for flavor, for safety. Warm liquid on raw beef sitting on your counter is how you spend a Tuesday you didn't plan on. For every 2 cups of coffee, stir in a tablespoon of kosher salt until it dissolves. Pour it over the steak in a dish or a zip bag, about 4 cups for 2 steaks. If you use a bag, stand it up, work the air out the side, then lay it flat. 4 hours is your minimum. 8 to 12 is where it gets good. Don't go past 24, because after a day there's nothing left to gain and the surface starts going dull. This is where most people throw away everything they just did. Pat it bone dry. Paper towels both sides, the edges too, and be serious about it. Wet meat doesn't sear, it steams, and steam is gray. Every drop left on that surface is heat spent boiling water instead of building crust. Then, give it one more rest, uncovered on a rack in the refrigerator 45 minutes, while your fire comes up. That cold, dry air pulls the last of the moisture off, and you'll get a crust like you paid for it. Season after that rest, not before. Coarse salt, coarse black pepper, garlic if you want it. You already salted it in the brine, so go lighter than your instinct tells you. Here's the piece nobody in these videos mentions, and it's the piece that actually closes the distance between a $5 steak and a $140 one. A marinade cannot give you marbling. Everything I just described softens muscle. None of it puts fat into it, and fat is half of why an expensive cut tastes the way it does. Marbling melts while the steak cooks and bastes the meat from the inside. A lean sirloin has nothing to baste itself with, so you hand it something. Ask whoever's working the meat counter at your Walmart for beef fat trim. Not stew meat, just trim. They're cutting it off everything they touch all day, and most will hand you a bag of it for next to nothing, because the only other place it goes is the barrel out back. Take it home, cut it small, put it in a pan on your lowest burner, and walk away for an hour or two. It melts down clear and gold. Strain it, jar it, keep it in the refrigerator for months. That's tallow. That's what your grandmother cooked in before somebody told her not to. Walt kept a coffee can of it on the back shelf his whole career. In the last 2 minutes of a cook, spoon a tablespoon over the top and let it run into the crust. That's the step that gets you the rest of the way to that $140 plate. You can't put marbling in. You can put the fat back on. Now the fire. 2 zones, coals banked to one side, nothing on the other. Hasn't changed in 30 years. Steak starts on the cool side, lid down, comes up slow, because a thick working muscle slammed with heat contracts and squeezes its own moisture out. Bring it up gently, and it relaxes into it instead. Pull it off the cool side around 105, maybe 110 in the center. Then it goes over the coals and gets seared hard, both sides, climbing the last 20 degrees in about 4 minutes while it builds that crust. Get a thermometer. Doesn't matter which one. Nobody paid me to tell you a brand. $10 or $12 gets you an instant read, and guessing at doneness is how a good steak dies. If you don't have one tonight, use your hand. Open your palm flat, press the soft pad below your thumb. That's rare. Thumb to middle finger, press that pad again, it firms up, that's medium rare. Ring finger, medium. Little finger, and now we're not going to talk about it anymore. 130 to 135 off the fire for medium rare. It climbs another 5 degrees resting, so pull it early, it always climbs. Rest it 10 minutes on a board, no foil tent. Foil traps steam and undoes the crust you just spent 12 hours earning. Then slice it against the grain and pay attention on a sirloin, because the grain changes direction partway across the cut. You may need to turn the steak and come at the second half from another angle. Thin slices, against the grain, every time. That's the whole method. Coffee, salt, 12 hours, dry it hard, 2 zones, tallow at the end, cut it across. Let's do the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the argument. That Walmart sirloin ran about $5. Coffee, maybe 40 cents. Salt, a nickel. The tallow was free because I asked for it. Call the whole plate $6 for one person eating well. That same cut of meat, cooked the way a $140 tasting menu handles it, salted early, rested dry, finished in rendered fat, sliced with the grain in mind, is not a different piece of meat. It's the same piece of meat with 31 years of technique poured over it, and technique doesn't show up on the receipt. I'm not going to stand here and tell you a Walmart sirloin becomes a ribeye or that it belongs on a menu with a Michelin star hanging over the door. It doesn't. And there's a reason that star costs what it costs. What I'm telling you is the distance between them is a lot smaller than the price tag wants you to believe, and every bit of that distance is technique. Technique is free. There's nothing in the description to buy. I don't have a rub with my name on the label, and I'm not going to put one there. The day I've got something to sell you is the day you ought to stop believing me. Now, the part that's been sitting on me. Beef costs more in this country than it ever has. The national herd is the smallest it's been since the early 1950s. Drought took the pasture, feed costs took the rest, and ranchers sold down their breeding stock. Once a cow's sold, you don't get a calf out of her next spring. That doesn't fix itself in a season. It fixes itself in years. So what's happening in kitchens all over this country is that a Friday steak is quietly turning into a birthday steak, and a birthday steak is turning into an anniversary steak, and eventually a family that ate beef every week for 3 generations just quits and tells itself it was cutting back. I've stood at that Walmart counter and watched a man do the arithmetic in his head, set the package back in the case, and walk on toward the chicken. I know exactly what just happened, and there's nothing I'm allowed to say to him standing there. So here's what I'm allowed to say now. You haven't been priced out of steak. You've been priced out of 8% of the animal. The rest of it is sitting right there in that same case at 1/3 of the money. And it's not worse meat. It's meat that had a job, and a cold pot of coffee and 12 hours of leaving it alone will carry you most of the way to a plate you thought you couldn't afford anymore. Every butcher I ever worked next to eats off the cheap end of the animal, and always has. We're not clever. We just spent our lives on the other side of the glass, and we could see what you couldn't. So to this one this week. Grab a chuck eye or a sirloin next time you're at Walmart. Brew a pot twice as strong as you drink it and chill it cold. 1 tablespoon of kosher salt for every 2 cups. Soak the steak overnight. Pat it bone dry. Leave it uncovered on a rack for 45 minutes. 2-zone fire, slow side first, sear last. Tallow over the top in the final 2 minutes. Rest 10. Slice thin against the grain. Then come back down to the comments and tell me what cut you found and what your Walmart had marked down that day, because the case doesn't look the same in every state, and I read every one of these. Next time, I'll show you how to dry age beef in your own refrigerator. No box, no equipment to order, a wire rack, a shelf, and 21 days of leaving it alone. It's the single biggest jump in flavor you can put on a piece of beef, and it costs nothing but patience. There's exactly one mistake that ruins the whole thing, and I'll show you what it is before you make it. Until then, buy the working muscle, cook it slow, cut it in,